Much has been made over the past few NFL seasons about the state of the league's TV viewership and the troubled relationship between the NFL and its once dedicated fan base. For a reference point, the average audience for a 2017 regular season NFL game was 14 million, down 9.7% from 16.5 million in 2016. Those in the know pointed to a number of factors that could have been plaguing the NFL's ratings. Obviously, there was a fallout following the NFL's mishandling of player protests and its failure to try and reconcile any of the differing views within its diverse fan base. The truth is, there are a ton of factors at play, each of which chipped away at the league's ratings. Whether it was the huge increase in other content consumption methods that comes along with all of today's modern streaming options, or frustration over the new style of play, or even the general perception that the quality of the product was going down the tubes, including the officiating. There is no denying that all of these factors played a role. Even with the downturn, the fact is that the NFL is still the NFL, and it wasn't exactly hurting for cash.
You just lost yourself a customer, Mo.
I forced myself to what?
You just lost yourself a customer.
Sorry, Homer, I couldn't hear you.
With $14 billion in annual revenue, it is by far the most popular and lucrative sports league in the United States, if not the entire world. Nevertheless, the business minds behind the sports behemoth were starting to get worried, and they needed to do something. They needed to find a way to start and re-engage some of its core fans and bring some of the mystique back to its product. But how? I'm sure they are trying a number of ways to get back in the good graces of the fans, but there is one strategy that, at this point, seems like it's blatantly being deployed. And that strategy is giving the league's marquee franchises that feature star talent a little bit of an extra advantage when it comes to questionable calls in a game, like the Green Bay Packers and their quarterback, Aaron Rodgers. Now, before the cheeseheads out there go crazy, claiming that anyone who believes this is a tinfoil hat-wearing nut job, just hear us out. I'm not saying that the fix is necessarily in when the Packers take the field. I just think that maybe, just maybe, it is possible that the referees are instructed to favor them if a call could go either way. And I'm not just spewing this out of nowhere, the facts bear it out. The first instance of this during the 2019-2020 NFL season took place early on in a Week 6 matchup against the division rival Detroit Lions. Heading into the contest, the Lions sat at 2 wins, 1 loss, and 1 tie, while the Packers, who hadn't hit their bye week yet, were at 4-1. Sure, the Packers had gotten off to a strong start in the 2019 campaign, but after a couple of down years, they were not the Green Bay that you could just pencil in for at least 12 wins in a home playoff game at the beginning of the season. This was all before the Lions' star quarterback, Matt Stafford, went down with a season-ending injury, too. And there was a growing sense around the league that just maybe this was the year Detroit could make a run at the division title, especially if they could steal one at Lambeau Field to pull within a half game of Green Bay in the standings. Anyone who watched the game saw an onslaught of questionable calls throughout the contest. The first instance happened early. Detroit was up 3-0 in the first quarter and was driving, ready to add to their lead. It was 4th down and goal to go from the Green Bay 1-yard line, and head coach Matt Patricia opted to leave the offense on the field. They loaded up their line with Kerryon Johnson alone, 7-yard deep in the backfield, and ran it up the middle. He powered into the trenches, his legs churning away, and appeared to break the plane into the red zone. 2 officials charged in towards the pile from opposite sides of the field, one waving off the touchdown and signaling for a turnover on downs, while the official on the near side trotted in, hands held high above his head to call a touchdown. Now, here is where it gets weird. The head official, Clete Blakeman, almost instinctively points his arm towards the other end zone, supporting the notion that Johnson hadn't broke the plane and giving the ball to the Packers, only to backtrack and announce that Johnson had scored a touchdown, presumably after the back judge came in and convinced him that it was pretty clear Johnson had gotten in.
One saying touchdown, one saying turnover on downs. Which way is it? This is referee Clete Blakeman, who has to figure it out.
The field is a touchdown.
The sketchy behavior around this play didn't end up hurting the Lions, but it was a pretty strong indicator that something was going on. The refs interfered again on one of the first plays of the second half. The Packers had the ball and ran wide receiver Geronimo Allison on a deep post route. Rodgers threw the ball a yard or two in front of him, and as Allison lunged forward to try and complete a shoestring catch, Detroit safety Tracy Walker read the play and tried to jump the route to make a play on the ball. The only problem was, as Walker launched himself towards the errant pass, so did Allison, and the play resulted in a scary collision between the two, a collision that Allison clearly took the brunt of. The moment itself was scary. Allison was motionless for what felt like an eternity, and ultimately had to be evaluated for a concussion. But that's the harsh reality of playing professional football. It's a dangerous, dangerous game. And if you watch the replay closely, it is pretty clear that all Walker does is try to make a play on the ball. If anything, Allison was the one who incited the collision with his errant dive at the end of the route. But logic rarely prevails in the NFL, especially when a marquee franchise like the Packers are involved, and the referees decided to call an unnecessary roughness penalty on Walker.
See the medical staff quick to get out to Allison.
Personal foul, unnecessary roughness, defense, number 21.
You could tell it was a bad call almost immediately, because more often than not, when the network's rules analyst gets brought in, they almost always back their striped brethren. But this was far from the case in this instance. ESPN rules analyst John Perry, who had the honor of refereeing 3 Super Bowls, went on air and spoke out against the call, saying it was a scary and violent play, but definitely not a penalty.
He is trying to make an interception. He is not initiating forcible contact helmet to helmet.
But as the game wore on, the call seemed to edge past questionable to offensively blatant, culminating in 2 ridiculous illegal use of hands penalties against Detroit's defensive end Trey Flowers. The first came in the 4th quarter and the Lions were leading 22-13. It was 3rd and 10 around midfield, Packers ball. Rodgers dropped back and surveyed the field, but the rush closed in on him fast and from multiple angles. Flowers was pressuring him on the edge, and when he slid up in the pocket, Kevin Strong, Detroit's defensive tackle, got home and took Rodgers down for a big loss. The sack pushed Green Bay back into their own territory and gave them a 4th and 21, basically forcing them to punt the ball back to Detroit. But wait, almost in WWE-like fashion, the referees came in with a late flag, and while Flowers' hands were high, they were clearly lodged into the shoulder pads of Packers offensive lineman David Bakhtiari and not in his face.
Boog, you're right. I think we get fooled there based on where the hand is on the upper part of the chest rather than the neck or the mask.
But either because of how Bakhtiari jerked his head backwards or because of some pre-existing bias, the refs backed the Packers again and called a crippling penalty that extended their drive and their chances at winning the game. And wouldn't you know it, the Packers would indeed capitalize on this gift from the officials, capping off the drive with a 35-yard touchdown pass from Rodgers to Allen Lazard. Detroit's lead was suddenly cut to 2. And if this call wasn't egregious enough, it somehow got worse. In the closing minutes of the 4th quarter, the Packers were again driving down the field, in part due to a missed pass interference call that halted the previous Lions drive. If interference had actually gotten called, the ball would have been spotted just outside the Green Bay red zone, giving Detroit a great opportunity to kick a field goal or score a touchdown and extend their lead. Instead, they were forced to punt the ball away just 2 plays later. Anyways, with the Packers offense driving late in the game, only to have some yellow laundry ominously tossed down onto the field.
Looking for something. Flag is down as he throws to the end zone.
Illegal use of hands, hands to the face, defense, number 90.
The players looked around, unsure of who exactly the penalty was on or what it was for, and it was yet another illegal use of hands called on Flowers.
But again, that is a terrible call. That's twice on Trey Flowers.
I do agree based on what we've seen so far. It does look like he's on the shoulder pad rather than the neck.
For the 2nd time that quarter, a mysteriously illegal use of hands penalty was called on Flowers, who both times clearly pushed into the lineman's shoulder, not his face. What's even crazier about this is, okay, maybe I could see a world where this gets called against an edge rusher with a reputation for these kinds of plays, but before that game, Flowers never had a single hands to the face penalty called against him.
You know, 2 illegal hands to the face penalties in the second half for Trey Flowers, and he had never been called for illegal use of the hands in his career.
And he shouldn't have been called tonight.
The Lions tried to bait the Packers into scoring a quick touchdown, but running back Jamal Williams intentionally stopped just short of the end zone, and Green Bay ran the clock down to the final seconds before Mason Crosby drilled a 23-yard game winner as time expired, giving them the win. And that is just sort of how this season has gone for the Pack. Whatever could go their way did go their way, and it shows. I mean, how else could they have played so many ugly close games and finished the season 13-3? It seemed like every other week they were winning a game on the final possession. This is pretty clear when you compare their point differential to the San Francisco 49ers, the other NFC powerhouse that finished the season 13-3. While the 49ers finished with a plus 169 differential, the Packers were only plus 63, meaning that they only had an average margin of victory of 4.8 points. I mean, the Dallas Cowboys, who didn't even qualify for the playoffs, finished with a better mark than that. The questionable incidents weren't just limited to the regular season either. In fact, the most recent incident actually took place during the NFC Divisional Playoff game between the Green Bay Packers and the visiting Seattle Seahawks. Green Bay got off to a hot start, jumping out to a 7-0 lead, and they stormed all the way to a 21-3 halftime lead. Seattle looked shell-shocked, but behind the determined leadership and phenomenal play of star quarterback Russell Wilson, the Seahawks were able to mount an impressive second-half comeback. They fought all the way back, punching in a fourth-quarter touchdown that brought the game to a 28-23 score after a failed two-point conversion. While somewhat deflating, Seattle had all three of their timeouts remaining and still had more than enough time to get a stop before trying to orchestrate another touchdown drive. Seattle forced a third down with 8 yards to go, but Aaron Rodgers converted a crucial third down pass to push Seattle to the brink. The Seahawks still had a shot, but their margin for error was now completely non-existent. It was either they force a punt on this next set of downs, or the game is over. Again, Seattle forced a third down and long, this time 9 yards. And again, Rodgers made a nice completion, this time to Jimmy Graham, who caught the ball about 5 yards out in the middle of the field and went charging towards the first down marker. He was brought down a few yards later and appeared to be short of the first down marker by less than a yard. After an impossibly quick booth review, the officials announced the ruling on the field stood and the Packers were able to kneel out the remainder of the clock.
After review of the play, the ruling on the field stands as called. First down, Green Bay.
After the game, Pete Carroll spoke about it rather glumly, acknowledging that it was very close, but arguing if they had called him short on the field, then that for sure would have stood as well. Obviously, the game doesn't just come down to that one isolated play. The Seahawks definitely had their opportunities, but when you run through some of the crucial calls from that game, it's hard to argue that the league wasn't favoring the Packers, at least a little. But that is clearly how this season went for the Packers. Everything that could go their way did, because the league clearly wants to see 35-year-old Rodgers back in action, donning the iconic Green Bay Packers uniform come Super Bowl Sunday. If you're new here and you haven't subscribed yet, now's a great time to do that by clicking the subscribe button down below. If you like the video, then like the video. We'd really appreciate it. And last but not least, don't forget to tune into TPS every single day for more cool videos. We'll see you next time.